Yes, welcome back to my channel at Mayora. I'm Sara, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about American literature. And specifically, I'd like to talk about a great, very famous and tormented poet of the 20th century, Sylvia Plath. So today in this video we're going to talk about her life, her biography, some main features of her works, and in my following video, in my next video about Sylvia Plath, we are going to read a very famous work and to analyze it. I'm talking about probably one of the most famous poems written by Sylvia Plath, which is Daddy. Now, let's start and talk about her life, to understand more of her poetry too. So she was born in 1932 in Boston, in Massachusetts, and she died in 1963. Her father, a very important figure in her life, was a professor at university in Boston. He taught German and biology. Well, German because he actually came from a Polish town where they actually spoke German, and biology with a very specific interest in apiology, so the study of the bees. Sylvia's mother was basically her father's master's student, and the father died in 1914 because of complications from diabetes. His sudden death, and the very painful relationship were actually a very important element, not just in Sylvia's life but also in her works actually. In fact, this strict, very authoritarian father and his death defined her relationships in her life, in real life, and obviously also her poetry. And we're going to talk about that specifically while talking about Daddy, which is actually an elegiac poem, but it is absolutely not conventional. It is very, very violent, very tormented, very painful. Now, Sylvia Plath kept a journal when she was very young, since from the age of 18, and then it was published in magazines and journals. Then after graduating, after high school in 1950, she published in the Christian Science Monitor, and then she attended Smith College, and after graduating there, summa cum laude, in 1955, she received a scholarship and she could move to Cambridge. There she could meet Ted Hughes, the poet Ted Hughes, and that actually became her husband. Another very tormented and painful relationship in her life, and she said for many reasons she compares Ted Hughes to her father, and she does that in a very strong way and in a very dark way in the poems we're going to read together. So Daddy. Now, then Sylvia was back to Massachusetts for a period, and she studied with another great poet, Robert Lowell, and in this period they published her first collection of poems, and the title was Colossus. Then she was back to England, and she gave birth to two children, a son and a daughter. The son was Nicholas and the daughter was Frida. Unfortunately, in 1962, Ted Hughes decided to leave Sylvia for another woman, Essie Goodman Withell. And this other terrible and very painful experience inspired Sylvia's famous book, Ariel. In 1963, she wrote a novel, so we're not talking about poetry anymore, we're talking about a novel here, prose. It is a semi-autobiographical novel, and the title is The Bell Jar, and she published that using a pen name, which was Victoria Lucas. Well, Sylvia suffered from very severe depression, and despite the cures, therapies, antidepressants, she tried to commit suicide many times actually. Unfortunately, she succeeded in doing that in 1963, and she was found dead from carbon monoxide poisoning with her head in the oven. That was obviously a tragic epilogue of a very, very painful life, very tormented life. She was actually associated with the confessional movement, and her works are often compared to the works written by the poet Lowell or Anne Sexton. Many works were actually published after her death. In fact, Ted Hughes published 3 volumes posthumously, and they were called the collected poems. And in 1982, she was awarded of the Pulitzer Prize. Now, her works, her poetry is the mirror of her life, of her personality, of her suffering. It is important to emphasize, to recognize this intense coupling of violent or disturbed imagery on one side, and sort of a playful, innocent, naive use of the language on the other side. Okay, so rhymes, alliterations. She uses a lot of metaphors and similes, a lot of metaphors which are actually very emotional and sometimes also very painful and violent. She also uses a lot the technique of the enjambment or enjambement, okay, which is a French pronunciation, which means that the line is cut off before the natural point, and it gives the poems a very particular rhythm, okay. So it sort of creates a sort of a cliffhanger, okay, and there is a very specific rhythm, and so basically the reader is following her own thoughts, her own emphasis, her own grief, okay. We are going to talk about all of the techniques that she used in the poem I told you about, so Daddy, in my next video, but it is also very important to understand all these elements of her life to better understand what she's talking about in her poems. So I hope that this video helped to understand more about her life, and see you again soon in my next video, and we'll talk again, and we'll say more about Sylvia Plath, her works, and we will read together one of her poems. Thank you so very much for following, thank you for your support, and see you again very soon. Bye!